My name is Callista Warren, though most people just call me Callie. I suppose I should start this at the front door. The one I used to unlock without a second thought, back when I believed I'd always have a place inside my parents' house. If I'd known that the last time I shut it behind me would be the last time I'd close it as my home, I think I'd have let my fingertips rest on the handle a little longer. It happened gradually, or at least, that's what they'd say if you asked them. To me, it felt like a rug yanked out from beneath my feet when I was already tired from balancing on one toe. I'd moved back in after college to save up. Just for a bit, I promised. A bit turned into 2 years. I paid rent, I cleaned, I made dinner when Mom worked late. Dad was always warm about it, saying it felt good to have me home again. Then my sister, Phoebe, turned up crying on the porch one rainy evening, holding a baby on her hip and a toddler clinging to her coat. Her husband, ex now, ran off with his dental hygienist. Cliché, I know, but pain doesn't care if it's cliché, so my parents opened the door like they did for me. And for a while we made it work. We ate dinners together, the kids scribbled on my old textbooks, and Phoebe slept in the guest room. But slowly, quietly, my room started to fill with boxes of baby clothes, children's toys, bins of diapers. One night, I came home from a double shift to find my desk pushed against the hallway wall. They needed more space, Mom said. It's only temporary, love. I tried to believe her. I squeezed onto the couch, tucked my things into the attic, folded my dreams into smaller corners. And the worst part? I didn't say a word. Because family means sacrifice. Because I loved those kids. I still do. But one morning, when I found a crayon mural scrawled across the last bare wall in what used to be my room, I knew something inside me had shifted. Phoebe had moved her children into my space entirely, my bed, my books, my window that caught the morning light. All theirs now. I didn't even get an apology. Just Phoebe shrugging, hair a mess, dark circles under her eyes. You're barely here anyway, she said. You're always at work. She wasn't wrong. I was at work. I was at work because I couldn't stand to breathe in that house anymore. I picked up extra shifts at the cafe, stayed late closing up, drank bitter coffee so I didn't have to come home to a couch that smelled like stale baby formula and crushed cereal. The night I decided to buy the house next door, it was raining. Again. Maybe bad weather makes me brave. I was standing under the cracked awning behind the cafe, counting my tips. I was exhausted. My manager, Carl, flicked his cigarette into a puddle and asked why I looked like a ghost. And I told him, like it wasn't the most humiliating confession of my life, I don't have a room anymore. He said, why don't you just move out? I laughed at that. Rent is hell in our town. I couldn't even afford the deposits. But then Carl told me about the old Granger place next door to my parents. The one with the blue shutters that needed painting. Mrs. Granger died last year. Her kids wanted to sell fast, and they'd take a low offer just to get rid of it. I walked past it every day. I used to think it was sad. The garden overgrown, the windows dusty. That night, I saw it differently. A place that could be mine. A place where no one could push my desk out into the hallway. I made the offer the next day. I cashed out what I'd saved. I took a small loan. I didn't tell anyone, not even Dad. I told myself it would be my secret, a quiet act of rebellion, of self-respect. I got the keys 2 weeks later, and when I let myself in for the first time, the musty smell made me gag. But it also made me grin. It needed work. So much work. But it was mine. I slept on a blow-up mattress that first night. Wrapped in blankets I'd stolen from the attic when no one was watching. I lay awake listening to the silence, to the creaks of a house that hadn't heard laughter in years. The next morning I stood at the window, looking at my parents' house. My mother's rose bushes bent in the wind. I could see my old bedroom window. The curtain was open, a plastic dinosaur peeking out from behind the glass. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt something sharper, resolve. I would not be the girl who let her life get boxed away. I would fix the leaks, paint the walls, Plant a garden that would bloom every spring without permission. The best part? They didn't even know I was here. At dinner that night, I still went over, of course. Family means sacrifice after all. Mom asked if I'd found a new place to crash yet. I said, working on it. I watched Phoebe spoon mashed potatoes onto her kids' plates like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. So here's the thing. You never really lose your place. Sometimes you just have to build it next door. And I'd only just begun. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The first night in my new house, I thought the silence would comfort me, but it roared. I lay there, eyes wide open on that squeaky air mattress. The ceiling above me cracked like an old map of roads I hadn't taken. I could hear every creak in the floorboards, every branch tapping the window like a bony finger reminding me I was alone. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something worse. That strange emptiness that comes when you finally get what you fought for. And it terrifies you because now you have to keep it alive. The house smelled like old books and stale air. The walls held the ghosts of someone else's memories. But they were quiet ghosts, and they left room for mine. By the time the sun rose, I had made a list. A real, grown-up list with bullet points. Fix the leak in the kitchen sink. Replace the broken window lock in the bedroom. Scrape the old wallpaper off the hallway walls. I taped it to the fridge, which was nothing more than an unplugged husk at the moment. But somehow it made me feel less alone. I had barely washed my face when I heard a soft knock on the front door. It was Mrs. Keller from 2 houses down, a sprightly woman in her 60s, all curiosity and conspiratorial smiles. She clutched a basket covered with a gingham cloth, like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. Underneath was a loaf of banana bread and a folded piece of paper with her phone number. "In case you need anything," she said, peering into the dark hallway behind me. Poor thing. It must feel so big for just one girl. "It's perfect," I lied, but it wasn't really a lie. She gave me that look, the one people give you when they're sure they know more about your life than you do. But I thanked her, and when she left, I broke off a piece of the bread and let it crumble onto the dusty kitchen counter. It tasted like hope. That afternoon I stood at the front window, peeking out through the blinds. I could see Dad in our old driveway, wrestling with the trash bins. Phoebe was in the garden, one baby on her hip, the other digging up Mum's roses with a plastic shovel. They didn't know they were being watched. And watching made me feel powerful, in a way I didn't know I needed. This place, my house, was a shield. I could step out of that shield whenever I wanted, walk across the lawn, ring the doorbell, act like the dutiful daughter and doting aunt. But when it was too much, I could slip back inside these walls and lock the door behind me. That first week, I slept with the keys clutched in my palm like a promise. The first project was the kitchen sink. It gurgled and spat brown water every time I turned the faucet. I watched hours of DIY videos on my phone under the flickering bulb. I scraped my knuckles raw on rusted pipes, dropped the wrench on my toe twice, and finally fixed the leak by sheer dumb luck. Or maybe stubbornness. I took photos of every tiny victory. The new faucet, the patch of hallway where I'd stripped the wallpaper down to bare plaster. I didn't post them anywhere. They were for me. Proof that I wasn't just drifting anymore. That night I found myself humming in the shower. A shower that only sprayed hot water if I jiggled the handle exactly right. 2 weeks in, Mom asked me if I'd thought about moving back. "Just until you find something proper," she said, stirring sugar into her tea while I sat across from her at the kitchen table. "I don't like you being by yourself like that." "I like it," I said too quickly. Phoebe glanced up from her phone, smirked, and said nothing. The kids were squealing over some cartoon in the living room, oblivious to the fault lines running through the adults. "Well, you know you're always welcome," Mom said, her voice all softness and guilt. "Thanks," I said, but I knew I wouldn't go back. That night, I stood at my bedroom window, staring at my old room across the fence. I could see the glow of a nightlight, the shadows of dinosaurs and trucks scattered across the floor. Part of me felt petty for watching. Part of me didn't care. One morning, I found Dad on my porch, just standing there like he'd been waiting all night. He held a bag of tools in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. "Thought you might need a hand with that fence," he said, nodding toward the battered picket line that leaned. I wanted to say no. Fiercely, stubbornly. But the relief cracked through me like sunlight. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that," angerously into the driveway. We spent all day prying out rotten posts and hammering in new ones. He talked about football, about the neighbors, about how Mrs. Keller was probably watching us through her curtains. He didn't ask why I hadn't told them. He didn't say he was proud, but I saw it in the way he checked every nail twice. At sunset, we sat on the back step, dusty and tired. He handed me the brown bag. It was 2 ham sandwiches and a flask of sweet tea. At sunset, we sat on the back step, dusty and tired. He handed me the brown bag. It was 2 ham sandwiches and a flask of sweet tea. "Your mom worries," he said. "I know," I said. "Tell her not to." He didn't answer. He just squeezed my shoulder, and when he left, I felt lonelier and braver all at once. A week later, I woke to find a note slipped under my door. In Mom's handwriting, "Why don't you come for Sunday dinner? Bring your laundry." The passive-aggressive kindness stung more than I wanted to admit. But I went. I let them fuss over my laundry, let Mom pack me leftovers, let the kids smear chocolate fingers on my sleeves. Phoebe didn't say much that day, but when I left, I heard her ask Mom, "When's she going to move on? She can't stay in that dump forever." I didn't spin around to tell her that the dump was more of a home than my old room would ever be again. Instead, I walked next door, unlocked my door, and laughed when the lock stuck for the 100th time. I laughed because someday I'd fix it, because I was learning. Every night, I kept my phone on silent. No group chats, no questions. Just me and the peeling paint, the crooked floorboards, the dreams that bloomed in every dusty corner. Then one night it happened. The knock on my door that changed everything. It was Phoebe. She stood on my porch, kids asleep in the stroller behind her, her face pale in the porch light. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice cracking. She hadn't set foot in my house since I bought it. I stepped aside, heart pounding. She sank onto the sofa, clutching her mug with shaking hands after I made her tea. She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there staring at the bare walls. "You did this all by yourself," she whispered finally. "Yeah," she sniffed, wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I didn't mean to... about your room. I didn't mean for it to be like that." I looked at her then. Really looked at her. The sister who used to braid my hair before school, who once helped me sneak out to a party and covered for me when I came home drunk. She looked so small, curled up on my secondhand couch. "I know," I said. Her eyes filled up. "I'm tired, Callie." I didn't say me too. I just put my hand over hers. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. The house, my house, creaked and settled around us like an old friend with secrets. I didn't know then what Phoebe's visit would mean, how it would drag open wounds I thought I'd sealed shut. But I knew one thing for certain. I'd built something here that no one could take away. Not again. This was only the beginning. The morning after Phoebe sat on my couch for the first time felt like the air itself had shifted. I woke up. She hadn't stayed long. After she cried on my shoulder, she bundled the kids into their coats and pushed the squeaky stroller back to our parents' place next door. She didn't look back once, but her words stayed like an echo. I couldn't scrub from these walls. I kept waiting for something to change. Maybe she'd knock again, or maybe I'd see her sitting on the porch swing that still needed its chains oiled. But days passed, then a week. Nothing, so I filled the silence with Haddad popped by sometimes. He never came inside, just stood on the porch with a bag of screws or a spare hinge from his shed. "Figured you could use this," he'd say, and I'd nod and take it, grateful that we didn't have to say more than that. Mom never came. I knew she watched, though the curtains in the front room would twitch when she thought I wasn't looking. Part of me wished she'd march over with her famous fussing. "Your windows need curtains, Callista. You can't just leave your dishes like that." Maybe then it would feel normal. But she didn't. And I didn't go over for Sunday dinner that week. I didn't expect Phoebe to show up again either. But one night, just after I'd managed to wrestle an ancient cabinet out of the kitchen, I heard that now familiar soft knock. My stomach twisted. I opened the door to find her standing there, alone this time, hugging herself like she might splinter apart. "Can we talk?" she said, eyes darting to the house next door. I nodded and let her in. We sat cross-legged on the dusty living room floor because the couch was covered with drop cloths and paint cans. She didn't seem to care. She just looked around like she was seeing the place for the first time. "You really did this," she whispered. "Still doing it," I said. My hands were covered in paint flecks. I felt raw, real. She hugged her knees tighter. "Mom and Dad don't get it." "I know." She turned her head to look at me. "I think I was jealous," she said, so soft I almost didn't catch it. "You always had a plan. Even when you didn't, you did. I don't know how you do that." I wanted to laugh. Me, with my cracked plaster walls and maxed-out credit card. The girl who slept on an air mattress that deflated if you shifted too much in your sleep. Phoebe, I don't have it together. Not really. MERS and sandpaper. I learned to fix the rotten floorboards in the hallway. YouTube was my best friend. Every nail I drove into place felt like a stake planted in the ground that said, "You don't get to erase me." Before dawn. That never used to be me. But in this house, I rise with the creak of its bones. I made a cup of cheap coffee on my wobbly stove and stood barefoot in the kitchen, replaying her voice in my head. "I'm tired, Callie. But you're here," she said. "You made here." I didn't know what to say to that. She stayed until after midnight. We talked about nothing and everything. Her ex-husband's lawyer threatening custody battles, Mom's constant passive digs, Dad's quiet disappointment that no one acknowledged out loud. It felt like being teenagers again, whispering in my old room with the covers over our heads. Except this was my room now. All of it. When she left, she hugged me so tightly I felt it in my ribs. "I'm glad you have this," she said into my hair. "I wish I did." After she left, I sat on the living room floor for a long time, staring at the walls, wondering what it would cost to give her the same freedom. But you can't hand someone courage like a house key. You have to find it in the cracks of your own walls. Work kept me busy. The cafe was short-staffed, so I picked up extra shifts. I'd come home at 2 a.m., kick off my shoes, and collapse onto that squeaky mattress, my body aching in a way that felt good. Earned. One Thursday afternoon, Carl cornered me by the espresso machine. "Heard you bought the Granger place," he said. "That's big news." I shrugged. "It's just a house." "It's freedom," he said. "Don't downplay that." I didn't tell him about the bank statement that made me want to vomit, or the black mold I'd found behind the bathroom sink. I just smiled. He handed me an envelope. "Got a bonus for you. You're killing yourself here." When I got home, I stuffed that envelope into a mason jar I kept under the sink. My just-in-case money. Maybe someday it would buy me new windows or a working oven. I didn't dare spend it yet. The next few weeks blurred together. Paint fumes, late-night scrubbing, old boards squealing under my feet as I carried boxes up and down the stairs. I thrifted furniture, bartered with Mrs. Keller for some of her leftover curtains, and slowly the place stopped feeling like a stranger's house. Then the letter came. I found it stuffed under my front door one rainy morning. No return address, just my name, scrawled in Phoebe's messy handwriting. "Callie, I need you. ... 3 words. My heart sank. I crumpled it in my fist and sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets. I knew what she meant. She wanted me to fix it. Whatever was this time. I'd been doing that since we were kids. The fixer, the middle sister, the one who smoothed the fights and bandaged the bruises. Part of me wanted to rip that note up and pretend I'd never seen it. But I knew I wouldn't. That evening, I went next door. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Clutter piled up in the hallway, toys, laundry, an unopened stack of bills. Phoebe was on the couch, eyes red. "The kids were at Mom's," she said. Her voice was flat. "He's back," she whispered. I didn't have to ask who. Her ex-husband, the coward who ran off with the hygienist. He wanted shared custody now that he'd run out of money and needed a clean image for his new fiancée. I sat with her on that same couch where I'd once slept. The same couch that smelled like baby formula and stale cereal. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes hollow. "Help me fight." So I did. I called a lawyer, the cheapest I could find but sharp enough to bite back. I filled out forms. I sat with her at the kitchen table night after night, going through every text, every receipt, every shred of evidence that proved he'd abandoned them. It was messy. Ugly. And every time I walked back to my little house next door, I felt the weight of it sink into my bones. Dad never said a word about the nights I spent pacing my living room, phone pressed to my ear while I argued with the lawyer. Mom didn't ask. She just dropped off casseroles. I never ate. The day of the first court hearing, Phoebe rang my doorbell at 6 a.m. Her hands were shaking so badly, she spilled coffee down her blouse. I cleaned her up, brushed her hair like I used to, sat her kids on my couch with cartoons while she sobbed in my arms. "Why are you still here for me?" she whispered. "After everything?" "Because you're my sister," I said, "and because this time I have somewhere to come back to." It wasn't until she left for court that it hit me. My house had become my fortress, the place I could close the door and breathe. No one could push me out of it. No one could take my room. The lawyer called that night. We'd won the first round. It wasn't over, but it was a start. Phoebe came by, kids in tow, her arms full of takeout. We sat on my living room floor, laughing through tears, the kids chasing each other through the half-painted hallway. At midnight, she hugged me goodbye. "You're my hero, Callie," she said, but I knew better. Heroes don't have cracked ceilings and mold in the bathroom. They don't cry on their air mattress at 3 a.m. because they're terrified the bank will call tomorrow. Still, when I lay down that night, I pressed my hand to the wall and whispered, "Thank you." To the house. To myself. It was far from over. But this time, I was ready. The next morning, sunlight hit my eyelids like an accusation. "Wake up, Callie. You asked for this." I rolled off my air mattress. It let out that pitiful sigh like it always did, and I padded barefoot into the kitchen, careful not to stub my toe on the loose floorboard. My fortress, my dump, my dream. It was all of that at once. Phoebe's kids had left their toy dinosaur under my table the night before. Bright green plastic with chipped paint. I picked it up, thumbed the edge of its tail, and wondered if it was possible to love someone so much and resent them in the same breath. Because that's what I felt about my sister, a tangle of protectiveness and old anger I couldn't shake. Outside, the wind rattled the front windows. It was cold. March was trying to pretend it was spring, but I could see frost clinging to the garden bed out back. My garden. Last summer it was just weeds and thorns. I'd cleared it, tilled the soil with my own blistered hands. I had plans for it this year. Tomatoes, maybe wildflowers. Something that would bloom, defiantly, like me. I made coffee. Strong, bitter, cheap. No sugar left. The grocery money had gone into the lawyer's retainer. Phoebe's fight was my fight now, too. I'd made it that way. And I could feel the weight of it in my chest every time I looked at the stack of unpaid bills clipped to the fridge. But I wouldn't let her drown alone. Not again. I pulled on my coat and boots and trudged next door. Mum's face was pale at the kitchen window. She didn't say anything when I came in. Just raised an eyebrow and pointed to the kettle on the stove. Dad was in the garden, muttering at the rose bushes that would never bloom right in this cold. Phoebe was in my old room. I still thought of it that way. Half asleep on a pile of stuffed animals. I sat down beside her and brushed the hair from her face. She jolted awake like a startled deer. "Hey," I whispered. "We're gonna win this." She nodded, eyes wet. "I know, because you're here." I didn't have it in me to tell her how much that hurt, how much it burned to be needed only when the house was on fire. That afternoon, back in my own place, I found myself scrubbing the kitchen floor so hard my knuckles bled. The house smelled like bleach and stale coffee. I needed it to be clean, even if nothing else in my life was. Mrs. Keller knocked mid-scrub. She held a tin of biscuits and a folded piece of paper. "Found this on your porch, dear," she said, slipping the paper into my hand. "And you look like you could use a biscuit." She didn't stay, just drifted back down the walk in her housecoat. I opened the note. It was from Phoebe. "Thank you for everything. I don't know who I'd be without you." It should have made me feel good. It didn't. It made my ribs ache, because I did know who she'd be without me. She'd be forced to stand on her own 2 feet. And maybe that would break her. Or maybe she'd finally learn to fight for herself. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house creak around me. The floorboards settling, the pipes moaning. It sounded alive. It sounded like it was telling me, "Hold your ground." The next day at the cafe, Carl caught me staring into my coffee. "You're a million miles away, Warren." "Am I? Am I?" "Yeah. Here." He pushed a paper bag into my hands. "Take this home. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Inside was half a loaf of bread, a container of leftover soup. I could have cried. I didn't. Instead, I spent my lunch break on the phone with the lawyer. Court dates, filings, threats from Phoebe's ex's new fiancé. It was endless. I held the phone between my shoulder and ear, wiping tables and pouring drinks, each "yes, sir," and asterisk, "I understand," chipping away at me. When my shift ended, I didn't go straight home. I walked the neighborhood, peering through fences at tidy lawns and cozy windows. I wondered what those people would think if they knew what my family was like. What I was like. When I finally unlocked my front door, the smell of old paint and dusty wood hit me like a hug. It was ugly, but it was mine. I found another note under my door. This one wasn't from Phoebe. It was from Dad. "Proud of you. Come over tomorrow for dinner." No frills, no smiley face. Just those words. And they cracked something in me that I didn't even know was brittle. The next evening, I walked next door. Mom fussed over my hair, my coat. Dad poured me a glass of wine. Cheap. Too sweet. Phoebe was quiet. The kids were loud. It felt almost normal, until Mom pulled me aside when everyone else was in the living room. "You're doing too much," she hissed, voice low. "You're breaking your back for her." I didn't have it in me to tell her how much that hurt, how much it burned to be needed only when the house was on fire. That afternoon, back in my own place, I found myself scrubbing the kitchen floor so hard my knuckles bled. The house smelled like bleach and stale coffee. I needed it to be clean, even if nothing else in my life was. Mrs. Keller knocked mid-scrub. She held a tin of biscuits and a folded piece of paper. "Found this on your porch, dear," she said, slipping the paper into my hand. "And you look like you could use a biscuit." She didn't stay, just drifted back down the walk in her housecoat. I opened the note. It was from Phoebe. "Thank you for everything. I don't know who I'd be without you." It should have made me feel good. It didn't. It made my ribs ache. Because I did know who she'd be without me. She'd be forced to stand on her own 2 feet. And maybe that would break her. Or maybe she'd finally learn to fight for herself. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house creak around me, the floorboards settling, the pipes moaning. It sounded alive. It sounded like it was telling me, "Hold your ground." The next day at the cafe, Carl caught me staring into my coffee. "You're a million miles away, Warren." "Am I?" "Yeah, here." He pushed a paper bag into my hands. "Take this home. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Inside was half a loaf of bread, a container of leftover soup. I could have cried. I didn't. Instead, I spent my lunch break on the phone with the lawyer. Court dates, filings, threats from Phoebe's ex's new fiancé. It was endless. I held the phone between my shoulder and ear, wiping tables and pouring drinks, Each, yes, sir, an asterisk, I understand, chipping away at me. When my shift ended, I didn't go straight home. I walked the neighborhood, peering through fences at tidy lawns and cozy windows. I wondered what those people would think if they knew what my family was like. What I was like. When I finally unlocked my front door, the smell of old paint and dusty wood hit me like a hug. It was ugly, but it was mine. I found another note under my door. This one wasn't from Phoebe. It was from Dad. Proud of you. Come over tomorrow for dinner. No frills, no smiley face, just those words. And they cracked something in me that I didn't even know was brittle. The next evening, I walked next door. Mom fussed over my hair, my coat. Dad poured me a glass of wine. Cheap, too sweet. Phoebe was quiet, the kids were loud. It felt almost normal. Until Mom pulled me aside when everyone else was in the living room. "You're doing too much," she hissed, voice low. "You're breaking your back for her." ... I wanted to scream. I always have. But I didn't. I just looked at her, really looked at her, the lines around her eyes. The way her hands fidgeted with her apron. "You let her take my room," I said instead, soft. Not angry, just truth. Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. "We didn't mean for it to be permanent. We thought you'd move on." "I did," I said. "Next door." She didn't speak, just turned back to the sink and scrubbed a dish that was already clean. Back home, I sat on my porch steps, staring at their house. My old life. My ghosts. And I realized they didn't own me anymore. That truth was heavy, but freeing. Later that week, the garden started to thaw. I spent hours pulling weeds, digging my fingers into the cold earth until they went numb. It felt good. Real. Honest work. Mrs. Keller stopped by with packets of seeds. Wildflowers, lavender, mint. "For the bees," she said, winking. I planted every seed like it was a promise. I am not going back. Phoebe's custody case dragged on. Some nights she brought the kids over to my place, let them crash on the couch while she slept in my bed. I didn't mind, not really. But sometimes, lying on the couch listening to the kids snore, I'd wonder, am I building a wall? Or am I building a bridge she'll never cross alone? One night, while she was upstairs, I found her phone buzzing on the table. Messages from her ex. Cruel, manipulative. Begging her to drop the case, come back, play nice. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall. Instead, I locked it in my kitchen drawer until she came down. "You deserve better," I told her, pressing it into her hand. She looked so small. "I know. I'm trying." And she was. But I was trying, too, to draw a line between her life and mine. SA. April came. The garden bloomed. Tiny shoots pushing up from the soil like they'd never doubted they belonged there. I painted the porch railing bright yellow. Mrs. Keller laughed when she saw it. "Bold choice, dear." But I loved it. It was cheerful, loud. Nothing about it whispered temporary. The last court hearing was brutal. I sat behind Phoebe, my knees bouncing, hands trembling. Her ex lied through his teeth, painted himself the victim. But the judge saw through it. We walked out of that courthouse with full custody in her hands, and tears in our eyes. Back at my house, we celebrated with cheap wine and stale cupcakes. The kids danced in the hallway. Phoebe fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. When they left the next morning, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing in the silence. My silence, my house, my rules. And I knew, as the sun rose over my yellow porch railing, that I'd done the right thing. For her, for me. But the story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And I wasn't done fighting for my own room in this world, no matter how many walls I had to build to keep it mine. The days after Phoebe's final court hearing blurred into a haze of cautious relief. She had won full custody. A paper shield, really, but a shield nonetheless. And the first thing she did was disappear into bed for 3 days straight. Mom brought her soup. Dad stood awkwardly by the door, offering to take the kids outside so she could rest. And me? I watched it all from my porch next door, coffee mug clutched in my cold hands, wondering why the victory tasted so bitter on my tongue. I told myself I should feel proud. I did feel proud. But somewhere under the pride was something that itched and stung, like a splinter I couldn't dig out. It whispered, "She'll always need you." And she did, even when she didn't say it out loud. It was May when the knock came again. This time, Phoebe stood there with her youngest half asleep on her shoulder, his cheeks pink from fever. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked, before I could even say hello. I stepped aside. She settled the baby on my couch and curled up beside him like a stray cat finding warmth. I covered them with an old blanket that smelled like my detergent, that sharp lemon scent that had started to feel like home to me. And as I watched her breathe, her ribs rising and falling under that worn blanket, I knew nothing had really changed. The papers might say the kids were hers, but the burden was still mine too, because I'd always pick up the slack. When she woke, it was past dawn. She found me in the garden, hands buried in the soft, damp earth. The wildflowers were blooming. Mrs. Keller's seeds had taken root, like they'd been waiting for my stubbornness to crack the soil open. "You didn't have to let me crash here," Phoebe said, wrapping her arms around herself. I shrugged. "Where else would you go?" She didn't answer that. She just crouched beside me and helped pull weeds in silence. It felt good. The sun on our backs, the cold dirt caked under our nails. Like maybe for a minute, we were two sisters who didn't have years of hurt wedged between us. After she left, the house felt heavy. I wandered room to room, looking at all the half-finished projects. The unpainted hallway, the cabinet doors that still didn't close right, the crack in the ceiling above my bed. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was mine. And that was what made it feel alive. I had just settled at the kitchen table to look over my budget when my phone buzzed. Carl, my manager, was calling. "Double shift tonight," he barked the second I answered. "You in?" "Of course," I said. Money was money. "You ever gonna take a break, Warren?" he asked, half joking. "When the house fixes itself," I shot back. "Fair enough. See you at 4. I hung up and stared at the scribbled numbers on the page. It was going to be tight, tighter than ever. Phoebe's lawyer had been worth every penny, but my savings were gasping for air now. My just-in-case mason jar under the sink was nearly empty. That night at the cafe, I poured coffee until my wrists ached. I listened to gossip from customers who didn't know me, who had no idea that the tired girl behind the counter was fighting to keep a roof over her head. Carl gave me a ride home at 2 in the morning. I didn't invite him in. He knew better than to ask. Inside, the silence greeted me like an old friend. I sat on the floor in the living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I thought about my room next door, the one with crayon murals and dinosaur toys and beds that weren't mine anymore, and I told myself, again and again, I will not go back. The next day, Dad knocked. He didn't say much. Just handed me a box of old tools and a faded envelope with a 20-pound note inside. "Your granddad's," he said gruffly. "Figured you'd want it." I didn't ask why he'd held on to it so long. I just nodded, pressing the paper to my chest like a charm. When he left, I tucked it into my mason jar. My jar of scraped-together hope. Summer crept in slowly, heating the tiny house like an oven. I propped the back door open to let the breeze in. Mrs. Keller brought over lemonade and sat with me on the porch, our feet up on the rail. "You know," she said, swirling the ice in her glass, "you remind me of myself when I first moved here." "Yeah?" I asked, wiping sweat from my forehead. too stubborn to leave when everyone told me I should. I stayed. I made this street my home. She nudged my shoulder. And so will you. Dot. I smiled, but the weight didn't lift, because every time I started to feel steady, the ground shifted. Phoebe called the next week. She'd lost her job at the daycare. Budget cuts. She needed help with the kids, so I left my half-painted hallway and the broken cabinet doors and babysat until midnight while she interviewed at grocery stores and retail shops that paid minimum wage. Mom didn't say much, but her sighs grew louder every time I walked through their front door. Dad's shoulders seemed to slump a little more each day, like he was carrying both our worlds on his back. One night, Phoebe and I sat on my porch after the kids finally fell asleep. She lit a cigarette, something she hadn't done since college. I thought I'd have more by now, she said, exhaling smoke that drifted into my open window. More what? Everything. Money. Security. Love. You've got your kids, I said too quickly. She flinched. Yeah, and you. That's what stung. Because she was right. She had me. She'd always have me. And part of me hated that. Hated how much I needed to be needed. After she left, I stood barefoot on the garden path, staring at the wildflowers that had started to tangle and overgrow. I thought about pulling them all up, tearing them out by the roots. But I didn't. I let them stay, messy and defiant, growing the way they wanted. When July rolled around, I got a second job cleaning offices at night. I'd leave the cafe at 5, grab a sandwich from the corner shop, and head to the high-rise on the edge of town. Empty halls, humming lights, the smell of disinfectant. It was mindless work, and that was what I liked about it. No one asked me questions. No one needed me to fix their life. I just scrubbed floors and wiped desks, and dreamed about new curtains for my bedroom. One night, after an 8-hour shift at the cafe and 4 hours cleaning, I trudged up my front steps to find Phoebe waiting. She was sitting on my porch swing, her hair tangled, her eyes wide with something close to panic. I think he's back in town, she blurted before I could even set my bag down. I think he's going to try again. The words knocked the wind out of me. What do you want me to do? Her mouth opened and closed. I don't know. I needed you to know. I let her come inside, made her tea, let her sleep in my bed while I curled up on the couch, listening to the old floorboards creak and groan under our shared weight. I stared at the ceiling crack, the one that had grown wider this year, and wondered how long I could patch my life with borrowed money and borrowed resolve before it split wide open. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. I didn't know it then, but the night Phoebe curled up in my bed muttering about her ex was the start of another slow unravel. The kind you don't see until you're sitting in the wreckage, wondering when the last good moment passed you by. The next morning, she made breakfast. It was the first time she'd ever done that in my house. She cracked eggs into my chipped frying pan, made toast, even found the half-empty jar of strawberry jam I kept for special days. I sat at the tiny kitchen table, watching her hum to herself like we were back in our childhood kitchen. Only this was my kitchen now, my stained sink and mismatched mugs and tiny window that let in just enough light to remind me I was still alive. When she set the plate in front of me, I felt something twist in my chest. I wanted to love her for trying. I did. But I couldn't swallow the bitterness that rose up with every bite. You know, she said, sitting across from me, I was thinking maybe we could do this more often. I could bring the kids over, cook, help you fix this place up. She looked so hopeful. It made me want to scream. You want to move in? I said flatly. She flinched. No. Well, not move in, just be around. The toast went dry in my mouth. I pictured it. Toys scattered on my floors again, my bed claimed by someone else's sleep, my walls echoing with someone else's chaos. I pictured myself back on the couch. My fortress turned into another room I didn't own. Phoebe, I said carefully, I love you, but this is mine. I need it to stay mine. She looked down at her hands. You don't want us here. That's not what I'm saying. But it was. And we both knew it. She left before noon, her shoulders slumped under the weight of my honesty. When the door clicked shut, I exhaled so hard it felt like I was coughing up years of swallowed words. I sat in the silence for a long time, staring at the cracked linoleum, feeling equal parts guilt and relief. I knew it wouldn't last. The peace, the boundaries, they never did with family. Summer baked my little house in heat and hope. I patched the roof with Carl's help. He brought his brother's ladder and a six-pack of cheap beer. We sweated under the sun, laughing about the birds that had built a nest in my gutter. "You're tougher than you look, Warren," Carl said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah?" I laughed. "Don't tell anyone." He looked at me, eyes soft. "You ever think about leaving this place?" I glanced at the street below. The rows of neat houses, the garden I'd coaxed back to life. "All the time," I said, "but I won't." He didn't ask why. He knew. Some things are too tangled to explain. That night I lay on my bed, and listened to the cicadas scream in the garden. The paint on the walls glowed faintly in the streetlight. I felt the ache in my arms from the day's work, the small pulse of pride that this broken, crooked place was holding together because I refused to let it fall apart. And then my phone buzzed. "Phoebe asterisk, can I come over?" I stared at the text until the words blurred. My fingers hovered over the screen. I could see her face in my mind, tired, desperate, that same look she'd worn since the day she'd shown up on Mum's porch with her life in boxes. No, I didn't send it. Instead, I typed, "Is everything okay?" Her reply came fast. "Kids are asleep. I just miss you." I almost told her to come. But I didn't. I set the phone down, face down on my nightstand, and let the house wrap around me like a shield. It was the first time I'd ever told her no, even if the words never left my lips. The next day, she didn't text. Neither did I. I spent the afternoon painting the hallway at last, a bright, soft green that reminded me of spring. Every brushstroke felt like a line in the sand. This is my space. When I finished, I sat on the floor and stared at the new color until the sun dipped behind the houses. I could hear laughter drifting over from my parents' backyard. The kids, Mom fussing over the grill, Dad telling one of his terrible jokes. It made my chest ache in that old, familiar way. But I didn't go over. I stayed where I was, letting the walls dry around me like a promise. Weeks passed. The kids' birthdays came and went. Messy backyard parties, too much sugar. Phoebe flitting around like a ghost. She looked so thin under her summer dress. When she hugged me goodbye, her fingers dug into my shoulder like she was trying to hold on to something solid. "Callie," she whispered, "thank you for everything." I wanted to tell her, "I'm not everything. I can't be." But the words stuck. I just smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and watched her walk back through the door I used to call home. At the end of August, Carl offered me a promotion, assistant manager at the cafe. More hours, a little more money, but no time for my second job cleaning offices. I lay awake for nights weighing the choice. Security or exhaustion? My house or my bank account? In the end, I took it. The raise was small, but steady. Enough to keep the lights on, to buy new curtains for the bedroom. I hung them one morning, pale blue, soft and clean. When the breeze caught them, they danced like they were waving to the world outside. I felt stronger then. Like I'd finally taken a step away from being the girl with a couch for a bed and no door to shut out the noise. But Phoebe didn't see it that way. She called one evening, her voice sharp. "Mom says you're working too much. She's worried about you." I bit back a laugh. "I'm fine, Phoebe." "Are you? You never come over anymore. You don't see the kids." "You can bring them here." She went quiet. "It's not the same." "No," I said, staring at my neat blue curtains. "It's not." That night I found a note on my porch, folded carefully under a potted plant. In Phoebe's handwriting, "I miss my sister." I sat on the steps, reading it over and over until the sun came up, and I told myself again, this is my room now, my house, my rules. When September came, So did the first cold snap. I woke to frost on my windows, my breath misting in the hallway. The old heater rattled and clanked but refused to kick on. I wrapped myself in blankets, poured extra coffee, and called every plumber in town. When the first repair estimate came in, I laughed. It was more than my next 2 paychecks combined. Carl saw me crying in the cafe storage room the next day. He didn't say much, just handed me an extra shift and told me to go home early if I needed sleep. I didn't go home early. I worked until closing, walked back through the crisp night air, and climbed into bed wearing 2 sweaters and 3 pairs of socks. I dreamed of warmth. My old room next door, the heavy quilt Mom always folded at the foot of my bed, Phoebe and I playing cards on the floor while the heater buzzed and the house felt safe. When I woke, the cold was worse. The pipes groaned in the walls like they were angry at me for pushing them so far. I sat on the kitchen floor, wrapped in my blankets, and told myself I'd figure it out. I always did. I didn't tell anyone how bad it was. Not Mom, not Dad, not even Phoebe. Because I knew what they'd say. Come back. Just until you get back on your feet. But I'd done that once before, and it cost me my room. So I put on another pair of socks, made another pot of coffee, and stared at my cracked ceiling. The house creaked around me. My fortress, my dump, my dream. I'd built this for myself, and I'd keep fighting for it, even if the walls never stopped groaning. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. It's strange how quickly you can get used to the cold. By the time October rolled around, I'd learned to live with the rattle of my old heater, coughing out lukewarm air like a half-hearted promise. I doubled up on blankets, lined the drafty windows with plastic sheeting I found in a clearance bin, and wore fingerless gloves when I did the books at my kitchen table. Every morning I'd sit there, staring at the numbers that never seemed to add up, and I'd wonder how much longer I could keep patching holes with borrowed hope. Phoebe stopped by less often. She'd call instead, short, clipped conversations about the kids, about Mom, about Dad's blood pressure, that he refused to get checked. But there was an edge to her voice every time I said I was fine. Like, she didn't believe me. Like she was waiting for the day I'd crawl back through our parents' front door, empty-handed and ashamed. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. One Friday night, Carl caught me lingering by the espresso machine long after my shift ended. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, that look on his face that said he was about to pry where he didn't belong. "What's up, Warren?" he asked. "You look like you're about to crack." "Just tired," I said. "Heater's shot." He frowned. "You get it fixed yet?" "Working on it." He opened his mouth like he was going to offer me money, but I shot him a look sharp enough to shut it down. He sighed instead. "You know you could stay at my place if you needed to." "No." The word came out harder than I meant it to. "Thanks, but no." He held up his hands. All right. Tough as nails, that's you." But his offer stuck in my head like a splinter all the way home. I didn't want his help. Didn't want anyone's, but it felt good to know someone would give it. That someone saw me freezing and wished they could fix it. When I got home, the kitchen was colder than outside. I could see my breath curl in the moonlight. I pulled the blankets tighter around my shoulders and whispered to the house, "I'm not leaving you." That weekend, Mom called. "Your sister says you're half frozen in that place," she said, her voice bright with forced cheer. "Why don't you come stay here until you sort it out?" I could hear Phoebe in the background, her voice too low to make out. I imagined them in the kitchen, the same kitchen I'd made dinners in, cleaned until my fingers cracked, and I felt my stomach twist. "I'm fine," I said. Mom's sigh was a knife. "We just worry, Callista." "I know," I said, softer now. "I've got it handled." But I didn't. Not really. The next morning, Mrs. Keller showed up on my porch with a space heater under one arm and a bag of scones in the other. "Saw you pacing by the window all night, dear. Figured you could use this." I wanted to cry. Instead, I hugged her. This tiny woman who'd lived next door since before I was born, and let her fuss about the garden I hadn't touched in weeks. Wildflowers are still holding on, she said, peering over the fence. Stubborn things. They get that from me, I said. And she cackled so loud I'm sure Mom heard her next door. The space heater didn't do much, but it took the edge off the cold. I'd sit beside it at night, bundled up with my budget sheets and my cracked phone screen, willing the numbers to make sense. The cafe was busier now that autumn had come. Students hunched over laptops, locals hiding from the early chill. Carl gave me as many hours as I could handle. But no matter how many shifts I pulled, it was never enough. One night after closing, Carl asked if I wanted to get a drink. I hesitated. We never did that, just the two of us. But something in his eyes, that mix of worry and warmth, made me say yes. We sat at the old dive bar on Main Street, nursing cheap beers and stale pretzels. He asked about the house. I told him the truth this time. About the heater, the pipes that moaned every morning like they were complaining about still having to work, the windows that rattled when the wind picked up. "Why do you stay?" he asked finally, his voice gentle. I stared at the rim of my glass. "Because it's mine." He didn't push it, just clinked his bottle against mine and said, "Then we'll figure it out." That word curled up in my chest, warm and dangerous. When I got home that night, the house felt colder than ever, but it also felt like it was waiting for me. Like it knew I wouldn't leave it behind. Days bled into each other. Work, home, cold nights, the hum of the little space heater that smelled like burnt toast when it ran too long. Phoebe texted sometimes. "Come over for dinner. Mum wants you to help with the kids. Dad says you never call. Dan Tuss." I ignored more of them than I answered. Not because I didn't care, but because every time I stepped through their front door, I felt that old ache in my bones. The same ache that reminded me of nights on the couch, my things stuffed in boxes to make room for someone else's life. One night, the heater sputtered and died completely. I sat there in the dark, wrapped in every blanket I owned, and thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the part where I give up. But then I heard it. A tap at my window. I pulled back the curtain, and there was Mrs. Keller, bundled up like an Eskimo, waving a thermos at me. "Hot chocolate," she mouthed through the glass. I opened the door and let her in. We sat on the floor together, sipping cocoa that tasted like childhood Christmases. She didn't say anything about the cold, didn't scold me for being stubborn. She just told me about her husband, how they'd bought their house for a song 50 years ago, how they'd nearly lost it when the factory shut down. "People think having a house is about bricks and nails," she said. "But really, it's about refusing to let the world push you out of your own life." I nodded, my eyes stinging. "I'm trying," she patted my knee. "You're doing more than trying, dear. You're staying." When she left, I sat there in the dark for a long time, holding that empty mug like it was a lifeline. The next day, I asked Carl for more hours. He just laughed. "Warren, you're here more than I am." "I know," I said, "but I need this." He handed me the weekend shifts. "You're gonna burn out, you know that?" "Not yet," I said. November crept in with icy rain. I patched leaks with duct tape, hung blankets over the worst drafts, and whispered promises to the house like it could hear me. "We'll get through this. We'll survive." On Thanksgiving, I didn't go next door. Mum called, her voice sharp. "The kids miss you." "They can come over," I said. She huffed. "Callista, don't be difficult." But I didn't budge. Instead, I roasted a sad little chicken in my broken oven, made instant mashed potatoes, and watched an old movie on my laptop. Alone. But not lonely. Not quite. After dinner, there was a knock at my door. Phoebe, holding a paper plate covered in foil. "Mum made too much," she said. "Thought you might want some." I took it, our fingers brushing. "Thanks." She lingered in the doorway, eyes darting to the blankets, the plastic on the windows. "You should come back. Just until you fix all this." I shook my head. "No." Her eyes softened. I'm sorry, Callie, for before. I know, I said, and I did. But sorry didn't fix everything. She hugged me. Quick, tight, like she was afraid I'd disappear. Then she slipped back into the night, leaving me with my cold house and my plate of leftover pie. I sat on the floor, eating cold stuffing with my fingers, and told myself again, this is mine, this is my room. And for now, that was enough. December arrived with a cold snap so sharp it felt like the air could crack your skin if you stayed outside too long. The plastic sheeting over my windows turned brittle overnight, the tape peeling at the edges like it was just as tired of holding on as I was. I started sleeping in the living room, bundled in my old sleeping bag, the little space heater humming beside me like a tired cat. Every night I'd lie there staring at the ceiling's hairline cracks and try to remember what warmth used to feel like. Work at the cafe was steady. Endless cups of peppermint lattes and holiday pies that smelled like someone else's childhood. Carl threw me every shift he could, but the heater's replacement estimate still sat taped to my fridge like an unpaid ransom note. 1,700 pounds. Urgent. I'd run the numbers 100 times. I'd squeezed my grocery budget dry, cut my phone plan to the bare minimum. Even skipped Sunday dinners next door to avoid Mom's pitying eyes and Phoebe's sighs. But the truth was cold and brutal as the wind through my cracked window. I didn't have enough. The day before Christmas Eve, I got home after a double shift to find a box on my porch. No name, just my name scribbled in Carl's sloppy handwriting. Inside, a new space heater, a proper one, bigger than Mrs. Keller's little one, with a bright orange heating element and a note tucked beside it. Stop freezing to death, Warren. We need you alive to yell at customers. I wanted to march back to the cafe and shove it back at him. Instead, I dragged it inside, plugged it in, and sat on the floor in front of it, feeling my fingertips thaw one by one. I whispered a thank you I'd never say out loud. Some debts you can't pay back with money. On Christmas Eve, Mum called 3 times. I ignored each ring. Finally, Dad came by. He knocked on my door like he was afraid I'd bolt if he made too much noise. Come next door tomorrow, Callie, he said, standing on my porch with his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. Your mum's cooked enough for the whole street. I'm good, Dad. I tried to smile. Maybe later. He didn't push. He just stared at me. My drafty windows, the taped-up cracks in the doorframe. You've done well, he said gruffly. More than well. That made my eyes sting worse than the cold. Thanks, Dad. He nodded, patted my shoulder awkwardly, then disappeared into the dark like he couldn't stand to linger too long in my struggle. I sat on the floor that night, Christmas lights from the house next door flickering through my thin curtains. I thought about my old room, about the crayon marks and the plastic dinosaurs, and the tiny hands that once took up all my space without a second thought. And then I thought about my hallway painted soft green by my own blistered fingers, my bedroom with its second-hand curtains that fluttered in the draft, my garden, asleep under the frost, but waiting for spring. Christmas morning, I stayed in my sleeping bag until the light slanted through the window just right. I pulled on 2 pairs of socks, made cheap instant coffee, and unwrapped the only present waiting for me. A pair of fleece gloves I'd bought myself at the pound shop. I didn't cry, I didn't feel sorry. I just sat there, sipping burnt coffee, wrapped up in the hum of my borrowed heater, and let the silence remind me that this place was mine. Cracks and all. Phoebe called that afternoon. Her voice was bright, forced. The kids want you to come for pudding. Maybe later, I said. Callie. I'm okay, Phoebes. Silence on the line. I'm sorry, for all of it. I know, and I did. But I wasn't coming back. After New Year's, the wind came harder. The plastic on the windows ripped free one night, snapping like sails in a storm. I sat on the floor, duct tape in hand, trying to patch it at 2 a.m, my teeth chattering so hard I couldn't swear properly. When it was done, I crawled into my sleeping bag, the new heater whirring bravely. I pressed my hand to the wooden floor, cold and solid under my palm. I'm not leaving you, I whispered. I'm not. January was all work. The cafe was dead quiet after the holiday rush. Carl cut hours where he could, gave me what he could spare. I scraped by. I always did. Phoebe came over one rainy afternoon. She stood in my hallway, dripping onto the floor I'd scrubbed that morning. Kids are with Mum, she said. I just needed… I don't know. She looked at the walls, at the little plants I'd coaxed back to life on the windowsill, the coat hook that still leaned sideways from when I'd first installed it badly. Her eyes shone. You did this, she whispered. You really did it. Yeah, I said, my voice cracking. I did. She hugged me so tight I could feel her ribs. You know you can always come back. No, I said, and this time I didn't flinch. This is my place. She stayed for tea, curled up on my sagging couch like she always did. We talked about nothing. Her new job, the kids' latest drama, Mum's new obsession with garden gnomes. When she left, the silence felt lighter somehow. Like it wasn't just empty, it was mine. One morning, a week later, I woke up to a knock on my door. Carl. He stood there shuffling his feet, holding out an envelope. From the staff, he said. A loan. For the heater. Carl. Take it, he said. We need you alive. Inside. Enough to cover the full repair. Enough to make me breathe again. Enough to remind me that sometimes staying means letting someone help you stand. When the new heater hummed to life, filling the house with real warmth for the first time in months, I lay on my bed, and let the tears come. Not because I was sad, but because I knew I'd built something that could hold me when I couldn't hold myself. I bought pastries for the cafe crew. I hugged Carl, awkward and tight. I went next door for dinner that Sunday, just for an hour, and sat at my old kitchen table while the kids smeared gravy on my sleeve. It didn't hurt like it used to. It just felt true. In February, the garden thawed. I pulled on my gloves, tilled the soil, planted new seeds. Mrs. Keller watched from her porch, clapping when I waved. Spring's coming, she shouted. I smiled. Yeah, it is. That night, I curled up in my warm bedroom, the radiator ticking quietly under the window. The house creaked around me, old bones settling, old ghosts easing back into the floorboards. I whispered to the walls. Thank you. Because I knew whatever happened next, I'd keep this room, my life, and no one was ever going to take it from me again. March arrived soft and slow, like an apology for the winter. I woke up one morning and the sun had found its way through the curtains, spilling gold onto the battered floorboards beside my bed. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like it was trying to freeze me out. It felt like it was breathing with me. I sat on the edge of my bed, my feet warm on the rug I'd bought secondhand, and listened to the tick of the heater humming steadily in the hallway. A good heater, paid for with borrowed kindness and the hours I'd poured into every shift. The old space heater still sat by the door, a reminder of the nights I'd spent shivering, whispering to the walls to hold themselves up a little longer. Outside, the garden was waking up. Little green shoots poked through the mud, reckless and stubborn. I slipped into my boots and went out to greet them, crouching down to run my fingers through the thawed soil. It felt good, real, to sink my hands into the dirt and know it would bloom because I'd cared for it. Phoebe called while I was on my knees in the garden. Mom wants you to come over for tea tonight, she said. Her voice was lighter now, not so sharp around the edges. She'd landed a new job at the bakery on Main, better hours, steady pay. It suited her, she'd told me last week, to make something sweet that people wanted to take home. I'll think about it, I said, pulling up a stubborn weed. You should come, she said. The kids miss you. They know where to find me. She laughed. Really laughed. And I felt that tight knot between us loosen just a little more. I did go that night. I stood at the front door of the house I'd once called mine and waited for the familiar ache to show up in my chest, the one that always whispered about lost space and stolen rooms. But it didn't come. I stepped inside and it felt like visiting a memory that had lost its sting. The kids barreled into me, faces sticky with jam, voices high and wild. Mum fussed about my hair, asked if I'd been eating well. Dad squeezed my shoulder and told me the garden next door looked good from his window. I sat in my old seat at the kitchen table, sipping oversteeped tea, and realized that sometimes you can return without slipping backward. Afterward, Phoebe walked me back to my front steps. The porch light flickered above us, casting soft shadows on the new paint I'd managed to slap on last weekend. "You're different," she said. "I don't know how to explain it." "So are you," I said. "That's a good thing." She hugged me tight, pressed her cold nose against my cheek like we were kids again. "I'm proud of you, Callie." I wanted to say it back. "I'm proud of you too, asterisk," but the words stuck in my throat, so I just squeezed her hand instead. When she left, I stood on my porch for a long time, breathing in the night air that smelled faintly of thawing earth and wood smoke. Inside, the heater hummed on, the curtains fluttered in the draft, the floorboards creaked in their old, familiar way. And I loved every imperfect inch of it. At the cafe, Carl pulled me aside one morning. "You look less haunted," he said, sliding a plate of free pancakes across the counter. "Gee, thanks." "No, really. You were always here. But you were somewhere else too. Now you're here." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just stole a strip of bacon off his plate and told him he still made terrible coffee. The days stretched out warm and sweet. I found myself dreaming again, about painting the bedroom a soft blue to match the curtains, about maybe replacing the broken porch swing one day. I made lists at my kitchen table at night, not budgets, but wishes. Little things I wanted to do, not because I had to, but because I could. One Saturday, Mrs. Keller waved me over to her garden. "Come look at these tulips," she crowed. "Best bloom in 10 years. I stood beside her, hands tucked in my jacket pockets, and we watched the bright petals shiver in the breeze. "You did this," she said, nudging me with her elbow. "Your stubborn hope must have rubbed off on my soil," I laughed. "It's not just me, it's the house." "Houses don't live without the people who love them," she said. "Remember that." April came, and with it, a letter in the post, a notice about the old Granger Place's property taxes. I read it 3 times at my kitchen table, my stomach flipping. I'd managed the bill so carefully, pinching every penny, but the tax was a lump I hadn't budgeted for. For a heartbeat, I felt the old fear press in, that edge of a cliff panic that I'd lose it all over something small. But I folded the paper neatly, set it on the fridge under a magnet, and reminded myself, I've handled worse. I picked up an extra shift. I skipped the fancy coffee beans. I sold a pair of boots I'd never worn, and when I walked to the clerk's office 2 weeks later to pay it off, the receipt felt heavier than gold in my pocket. That night, I made tea, sat in my hallway, the one I'd painted green all those months ago, and leaned my back against the wall. I closed my eyes and felt the heartbeat of the house under my spine. Sometimes, you build a home, one nail, one coat of paint, one stubborn, shivering night at a time. Sometimes it builds you right back. In the middle of the night, I heard a knock on my door. My heart jumped. I pulled on my robe, padded down the hallway. Phoebe. She looked half asleep, her hair wild. Kids can't sleep. They miss you. It's midnight, Phoebes. She bit her lip. Can they come? I hesitated. Then I nodded. Just tonight. They tumbled in like they owned the place, giggling, dragging blankets, yawning wide-mouthed yawns. They curled up on my couch, on the rug, wherever they landed. Phoebe watched me from the hallway, her eyes soft. You don't have to. I know, I said, but I want to. When she left, I sat on the floor beside them, brushing hair from tiny foreheads, listening to their sleepy breathing. This house, this battered, beautiful place, was big enough for all of me now, the parts that wanted space, and the parts that wanted to hold the people I loved close. I dozed there until dawn, my back against the green wall, the heater purring in the corner. I dreamed of summer gardens and painted porches and mornings when I wouldn't have to fight so hard just to stand my ground. When the kids woke, I made pancakes. Burned the first batch, as always. They laughed like it was magic. And maybe it was. Later, Phoebe texted, "Thank you." I sent back, "You're welcome." But I'm keeping my room, because I knew now, love doesn't mean giving up your space. It means protecting it so you can keep giving from it. And maybe, someday, that lesson would bloom as stubbornly as my garden out back. Wild, imperfect, and mine. May came in like a promise. The sun rose earlier each day, pouring gold over my garden and sneaking warm fingers under my curtains, before my alarm ever dared to buzz. I'd wake up to birdsong instead of the groan of my old heater. It felt like the house was stretching, yawning open to let the light in after so many months of being shut tight against the cold. I'd bought a cheap rocking chair at a garage sale the week before. The paint was peeling, the seats squeaked like a mouse every time I shifted. But it fit perfectly on my tiny porch, where I sat with my chipped mug of coffee and watched my wildflowers bloom. From there, I could see the house next door, Mom's rose bushes bursting pink against the fence line, Dad pottering around in his shed, Phoebe's laundry flapping on the line like bright flags of surrender. Sometimes she'd spot me and wave, her smile hesitant but real. The kids would run over, faces sticky with jam, to press their noses against my garden gate and ask what I was planting this year. "Lavender," I'd say. "Wild mint. Maybe cucumbers." They'd wrinkle their noses at the cucumbers and giggle like I'd told them a rude joke. One Saturday, Mom wandered over. She hadn't been inside my house since the heater got fixed. She stood on my porch like she was waiting for an invitation to a secret club. "You look well," she said, her eyes sweeping over the garden beds I'd edged with old bricks. "The place looks well, too." "Thanks, Mom," I said. I wanted her to see it all. The cracks, the patched-up paint, the way my front steps leaned a bit to the left. I wanted her to see that I loved it anyway. She sat in the other chair, the one Mrs. Keller had left for me when she upgraded to something fancier. "Your father misses you coming for Sunday dinners." "I'm right here," I said, gesturing to the house next door. "He can come over." Mum frowned like she always did when I reminded her that family worked both ways. "It's not the same." "It is for me." We sat in silence after that. She sipped the weak tea I'd made her, watching the kids chase each other around the yard. She didn't say sorry for giving my room away all those years ago. I didn't expect her to. Some things settle in the silence better than they do in words. When she left, she paused on the top step. "You've made this yours, Callista. I hope you know that." "I do," I said. And I did. By late May, my garden was wild with color. Mrs. Keller brought me cuttings from her roses, and Carl dropped off a bag of seed packets he'd found on clearance. "For your fortress," he said, handing me a tin of cheap biscuits along with them. "Can't have you wasting away while you plant your empire." "My empire?" I laughed. "Sure," he said, grinning. "Queen Callie of next door." The name stuck in my head that night as I watered the lavender shoots. Queen Callie of next door. It sounded ridiculous, but it felt right too, like claiming something I'd never dared to before. June brought more work at the cafe. Tourists trickled in, students stuck around for summer classes, and the tips got better. I started a new jar under the sink, my someday fund, not for emergencies this time, but for something I wanted. A proper bed frame, maybe new curtains, a real dining table instead of the rickety one Mum had given me when I moved out. One sticky afternoon, Phoebe showed up on my porch, kids in tow. They flopped on my steps, fanning themselves with paper plates. "Air conditioner's busted," she said, flopping beside me in the rocking chair. "Mum says to come over, but you know how she gets when we stay too long." "Want to hide out here for a bit?" I asked. Her shoulders dropped like I'd taken a weight from them. "Could we?" I let them in. The kids made forts out of my old blankets, giggling so loud I had to hush them 3 times when Mrs. Keller peeked through the fence. Phoebe sat on my couch, her knees pulled up, watching them like they were a dream she hadn't quite figured out how to hold. "You're good at this," she said softly. "At what?" "Making space for people, without losing yours," It was the closest she'd ever come to saying what I knew had been sitting between us for years. That she took up space I'd been too scared to fight for. That I'd let her because I didn't know I was allowed to want something just for me. "I'm learning," I said. "It's not easy." She nodded, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "I'm glad you are." That night, after they left, I sat on my porch steps with the porch light buzzing above me. The house was quiet, but not empty. It felt like it was holding my memories in its old bones. The girl I'd been, the sister I'd been, the woman I was becoming. One morning in July, Carl asked me to train a new hire. "She reminds me of you," he said. "Fierce, mouthy, tries too hard not to need anyone." I snorted. "Sounds exhausting." "She'll learn," he said. "You did." On my break, I watched the new girl, her hair tied back with a rubber band, knuckles red from scrubbing the espresso machine. She caught me watching and scowled like I'd seen too much. "You'll get there," I told her. "One shift at a time." She rolled her eyes, but she smiled too. I saw myself in that smile. The version of me who'd scrubbed dishes at 17, dreaming of a place that felt like mine. The next time I paid my bills, I did it without the pit in my stomach. The taxes were paid, the lights stayed on, the heater waited for next winter without threat of betrayal. The someday fund jar was half full. In the garden, the mint was taking over. I plucked a handful, crushed it between my fingers, and inhaled the sharp, clean scent. It smelled like everything I'd fought for. Fresh, wild, stubborn. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the roofs, Dad wandered over, his hands stuffed in his pockets like he was hiding the fact that he'd brought me a plastic bag full of fresh tomatoes. "Your mum says you don't eat enough vegetables," he grumbled, handing it over like it was contraband. "Tell her I'm fine," I said, leaning on the porch rail. "You are," he said, his eyes soft. "You really are." We didn't talk about my room, or Phoebe, or the years I'd slept on their couch while my world shrank around me. We didn't have to. It was all here. In the wildflowers climbing the fence, the porch paint peeling just so, the rocking chair creaking under my weight. When he left, I made a sandwich with the tomatoes, and sat on the steps, feet bare, watching the street settle into evening hush. I thought about the girl who'd counted tips under the cafe awning, rain dripping off her hair, dreaming of a place that would be hers. I thought about every box I'd dragged across this floor, every nail I'd hammered, every night I'd curled up whispering promises to the walls to hold steady for just one more day. And I thought about tomorrow. About the garden that would keep growing, the porch swing I'd fix, the paint I'd slap on the door when the money came. It was all mine now. The struggle, the soft hush of summer nights, the stubborn bloom of lavender in my garden. And no one, not Phoebe, not the past, not the old ghosts of the room they gave away, could ever take it back. My house, my room, my life. And I'd protect it, bloom by bloom, brick by brick, one summer night at a time. August came humming with crickets and the hiss of sprinklers from the house next door. My garden was a jungle by then, mint climbing over the bricks, lavender spilling onto the path, tomatoes ripening faster than I could pick them. Sometimes I'd catch Phoebe's youngest perched on my fence, tiny fingers snagging the red fruit when he thought I wasn't looking. I never scolded him. I liked that my garden fed more than just me. The heat made everything slow. I started leaving my windows open at night, a soft breeze carrying in the smell of wild mint and the murmur of my neighbors' televisions. I'd lie awake on my bed. My real bed, the one I'd finally bought from a charity shop, mattress and frame and all, and listen to the house breathe around me. It didn't groan like it used to. It didn't feel like it was trying to swallow me whole. Sometimes I'd dream of the girl I'd been when I'd first turned the key in this lock. How scared she'd been. How tired. How sure she'd never be enough to hold a house together on her own. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, "Look at you now." I wasn't rich. I wasn't free of worry. But the walls stood because I did. One Sunday, Mom surprised me by knocking on my back door. She never did that. She stood there with a plastic tub of leftover roast and a nervous twist to her mouth. "Your sister says you've been feeding the kids too much sugar," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "They raid my garden, Mum. I can't exactly hide the tomatoes." She huffed, but she came inside anyway. She stood in my kitchen, looking at the fresh coat of paint I'd managed to slap on the cabinets, the new curtains that fluttered in the breeze. "It's nice," she said softly. "It's mine," I said, not to be mean. "Just the truth." She nodded. "I know." She touched the edge of the counter, fingertips tracing where the paint had bubbled a little. "You were always the stubborn one." I wanted to say, "I learned from you." But some things were better left unsaid. She stayed for tea. We talked about the kids, about Dad's latest attempt at growing strawberries, about Mrs. Keller, who'd been talking about moving in with her daughter by Christmas. When she left, she kissed my cheek, her lips dry and warm. "You've done well, Callista." After she left, I washed the mugs, humming to myself. The kitchen window framed my garden like a painting. My garden. My chipped sink. My humming heater, waiting quietly for winter. That evening, Phoebe came by with the kids. She dropped them off with a bag of frozen pizza and a box of crayons, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "One night," she said, "I need a break." I could have said no. I could have reminded her that this was Kof-me's space. But I didn't. The kids made a mess in the living room. Blankets, pillows, crayon murals on old newspaper. They curled up on my new rug, feet bare, breathing slow and soft under the swirl of the ceiling fan. When Phoebe came to pick them up in the morning, she stood in my doorway, her hand on the frame. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "What?" "Building all this, alone." I looked past her to the couch where the blankets still lay rumpled, to the mugs in the sink, to the floorboards that creaked under my weight but didn't buckle. "Never." She blinked, her eyes shining. "I wish I was like you." I laughed, not unkindly. "You don't want to be like me, Phoebes. You're exactly who you're meant to be." When they left, the house felt bigger again. The quiet wasn't sharp like it used to be. It was soft. I spent the afternoon on the porch with Carl. He'd stopped by with lemonade and gossip about the new hire at the cafe. "She's got a mouth on her, that one," he said, stretching his legs out. "Reminds me of you when you first showed up." "Poor girl," I teased. "I was awful." "Nah," he said. "You were a hurricane. But you built something after the storm." We sat there until the sun dipped below the roofs, talking about nothing and everything. When he left, he kissed my cheek, something he'd never done before. It made my heart twist in a way I didn't know what to do with. But I didn't stop him. That night, I lay in my bed listening to the crickets in the garden, the walls creaking like they were telling me secrets. I thought about the next thing on my someday list. New siding for the house, maybe new windows if I could swing it. I didn't know when I'd get there. But I would. One step at a time. One stubborn, scraped-together dollar at a time. Late August brought storms. Rain pounded my roof like fists. I watched from the porch as the garden drank it up, the mint flattening under the weight, only to spring back when the clouds passed. That's how it was, I thought. You bend, but you don't break. After the worst of it, I found a leak in the bedroom ceiling. I dragged a bucket under it. Watched the steady drip, drip, drip soak the bottom. "It's okay," I told the house. "We'll fix it." Phoebe offered to call Dad. "He's good with patch jobs," she said. "I got it," I said. "But tell him thanks." I found Carl instead. He came over with tarps and sealant, balancing on my wobbly ladder while I held it steady, our laughter echoing down the street. "You're the most stubborn woman I know," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "That's why you like me," I shot back. He paused, halfway down the ladder. "Yeah," he said, softer now. "It is." When he finished, we sat on the porch, wet hair plastered to our foreheads. He leaned in and kissed me again, not shy this time. It didn't feel like rescue. It felt like something earned, like another piece of my life, falling into place exactly where it belonged. After he left, I sat cross-legged on my bed, the bucket still catching the last of the drip. The house felt warm despite the rain, like it was wrapping its old bones around me in a hug. I pressed my palm to the wall and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. I wasn't the girl who gave her room away anymore. I wasn't the sister who let her life get boxed up to make space for someone else. I was Callista Warren, Queen Callie of next door. And this house, this room, this life was mine. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I'd fix the ceiling, pull the weeds, scrub the floors, patch the paint. Because a fortress wasn't built in one day. And some battles were worth fighting again and again. For this. For me. For the promise I'd made to that scared girl with the key and nowhere else to go. For the room that no one would ever take from me again. September came whispering through my window screens, soft breezes carrying the first hints of a new season. I'd wake up to golden mornings now, sunlight slipping through the half-finished patch in my ceiling, the one I'd covered with a scrap of tarp until I liked it. The imperfection of it. Proof that I was still here, still patching, still staying. Carl was over more and more now. He'd bring bags of cheap groceries, tins of soup, day-old bread, milk with just enough days left before it turned. He'd cook sometimes too, though he'd never admit he was good at it. We'd sit on my porch, legs tangled on my mismatched chairs, the garden going wild around us. "You know," he said once, swirling cheap red wine in a mug, "some people would say you should just move." "Some people don't know what it's like to lose your room," I said. He studied me, the evening light turning his scruffy hair to copper. "And you'd never risk that again?" "Never," I said. And I meant it. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at my house like he could see its bones the way I did. The cracks and the soft creaks. The patch jobs that were more hope than skill. He never offered to fix it all for me, though. He'd lend a hand, hold the ladder, buy me the good duct tape. But he always let me swing the hammer. I think that's why I let him stay. One night, Phoebe came over. She brought leftover birthday cake for the kids, but they were next door with Mum. She sat on my couch instead, cross-legged like a teenager. "You know," she said, licking frosting from her finger, "I used to think you were so reckless." "I was," I said. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You weren't reckless. You were brave. I was reckless. Barging into your space like I had a right to it." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that we hadn't already learned in the years between then and now. She looked around. The patched walls, the old couch, the garden light flickering through the window. "It's beautiful, Callie. It's mine," I said softly, save for proper shingles. It made the light scatter in strange patterns on my bedroom walls, like the house was trying to paint me a new dream every day. She hugged me then, her hair smelling like the bakery she worked at now. She smelled like cinnamon and yeast and 100 second chances. When she left, she closed the door behind her carefully, like she didn't want to wake the house. Winter began its slow creep in October. The heater hummed without complaint this year, my fortress doing its job. I strung cheap fairy lights around the porch, wrapped an old blanket around my rocking chair so I could still sit outside with my coffee in the mornings. I watched the garden die back, mint going to seed, lavender turning brittle and brown. I didn't mourn it. I knew it would come back. Everything does when you tend to it long enough. One crisp Sunday, Dad came by alone. He stood in my hallway, shifting his weight from foot to foot, like he was bracing himself for something big. "Your mum's thinking of selling," he said. I blinked. The house? Too much for us now. Big, drafty, leaky roof. He gave me a small, sad smile. "You know how that is." I did. "Phoebe wants to rent a little place closer to the bakery. Says the kids need their own rooms again." I leaned against my freshly painted door frame. Blue this time, to match my curtains. "What about you and Mum?" He shrugged. "Flat somewhere, smaller, easier." I could see it then. My old house without my family inside. The roses dead, the porch swing falling apart. Some stranger pulling up the crayon murals in my old bedroom. For a moment that old fear pressed against my ribs. But then I felt the floor under my bare feet. Solid, mine. "You'll always have somewhere to come," I said. Here. His eyes went glassy. He didn't hug me. We weren't that kind of family. But he patted my shoulder, warm and heavy. You're a good girl, Callista. I'm not a girl anymore, Dad, I said, smiling. When he left, I made tea and sat on my porch, knees tucked under my chin. Carl showed up an hour later, as if he'd known I'd need him. He settled behind me, his arms around my shoulders, chin resting on my hair. You ever think about moving? He asked, voice muffled by my sweater. No, I said. Not ever. He squeezed my arms. Good. I thought about what might come. New owners next door, fresh paint on old bricks, the kids' laughter drifting from somewhere else. And I knew I'd be okay, because I'd already survived the worst of it. I'd built my walls strong enough to hold my own heartbeat. Christmas came early that year. Carl brought over a tiny fake tree he'd rescued from the cafe storage closet. The kids helped me decorate it with scraps of ribbon and tinfoil stars. Phoebe sat on the floor beside me, humming carols off-key, her hair tucked behind her ears like she used to do when we were teenagers. Do you ever wish it was different? She asked, eyes on the twinkle lights. No, I said, not anymore. We sat like that until the kids fell asleep, their sticky fingers curled around candy canes. Carl washed the mugs in my sink like he owned the place. Maybe, in some ways he did. Not because he'd bought it for me or saved me, but because he'd seen every crack and never once told me to run. New Year's Eve, I stood in my garden, fireworks cracking overhead. The porch light flickered in the cold, the lavender dead stalks rattling against my boots. I whispered a promise to the dark. Another year, another room, another season, and I'm still here. I went inside to find Carl waiting, leaning against my hallway wall. The green one, the first one I'd painted when this place was just a prayer and a stubborn heartbeat. He held out his hand. Dance with me. There's no music, I laughed. Doesn't matter, he said. So I did. Bare feet, on my creaky floorboards, my arms around his neck, his breath warm on my ear. The house seemed to hum with us, the walls softer somehow, the floorboards holding steady under our shifting weight. And in that moment, I knew. The girl who lost her room had made a home so strong, even the ghosts had to find new places to hide. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.